You've spoken honestly about the possibility of war between US and China in the long term, if no diplomatic solution is found.
Well, it's worth reading that book on the difficult to pronounce Thucydides Trap, I believe it's called. I love war history. And trying to figure out what really was the cause of victory in any particular case, as opposed to what one side or another claimed was the reason.
How do we avoid the trajectory where these two superpowers clash?
压迫奴役我们，谁妄想这样干，必将在14多亿
You know, you're talking about a potential war with China. Now, I deal with these people all the time. And I'm
For
dealing
centuries,
with Pete, I'm dealing
history
with
has whispered a warning, one that echoes from the ruins of ancient empires to the corridors of modern superpowers. When a rising power challenges the old order, war is not just possible, it is almost inevitable. Athens rose, Sparta struck. The world watched as their ambitions clashed, igniting a war that reshaped history. Today, the stage is set once more. China ascends. America stands firm. The question is no longer if they will collide, but how. Can history be defied? Or are we doomed to repeat the cycle that has consumed empires before us? This is Thucydides' Trap, and we may already be in it.
That Athens and Sparta is a classic case. The thing about the Greeks is they really wrote down a lot of stuff. They loved writing. They were very articulate on it. They just love writing. So, and we have a bunch of that writing that's preserved. So we know what led up to the Peloponnesian War between the Spartan and Athenian alliance. We know that they saw it coming. I mean, the Spartans didn't write. They also weren't very verbose by their nature, but they did write, but they weren't very verbose. They were terse. But the Athenians and the other Greeks wrote a lot, and they were like, and Sparta was really kind of like the leader of Greece, but Athens grew stronger and stronger with each passing year, and everyone's like, well, that's inevitable that there's going to be a clash between Athens and Sparta. Well, how do we avoid that? And they saw it coming, and they still could not avoid it.
Throughout history, great powers have clashed in a relentless struggle for dominance. Athens and Sparta, Rome and Carthage, the United States and the Soviet Union. Today, the stage is set for a new confrontation, one fought not with armies, but with trade policies, supply chains, and technological supremacy. The United States and China, the two largest economies on Earth, are locked in an economic war that is no longer a question of if, but when, and how severe.
Chinese President Xi Jinping reportedly furious over a Hong Kong company's plan to sell its Panama Canal ports to a U.S. group led by BlackRock.
China essentially had it. It was a China-based company. I'd much rather deal with BlackRock than a China-based. We should have never given it. But we didn't give it to China. We gave it to Panama.
U.S. tariffs on China are now in effect, and China is striking back.
And until they ripped all the signs down about a week ago, when they saw that I was serious about this, you know, most of the signs were written in Chinese. They were all Chinese all over the place. That wasn't the deal. We're taking the Panama Canal back.
The country's finance ministry announcing a 15% tariff on U.S. coal and liquefied natural gas.
I are firmly opposed to this unwarranted increase, and we do believe that this is in violation of the WTO rules.
Since the late 19th century, the United States has been the world's most dominant economic force. But now, China's economy is projected to surpass that of the US, possibly even doubling or tripling its size. What happens when the largest player in the global order is no longer the strongest? Does economic dominance always translate into military confrontation?
You know, the United States has been the biggest kid on the block since, I think, around 1890 from an economic standpoint. So the United States has been the most powerful economic engine in the world longer than anyone's been alive. Now we have a situation, in the case of China, where the economy is likely to be 2, perhaps 3 times larger than that of the US. So imagine you're the biggest kid on the block for as long as anyone can remember, and suddenly a kid comes along who's twice your size.
So we see it coming.
Yeah.
How is it possible to stop? Is there some, let me throw something out there, just intermixing of cultures, understanding? There does seem to be a giant cultural gap in understanding of each other.
Unlike past empires, China has largely been inward-looking. Its history is marked not by grand invasions, but by internal strife, civil wars so brutal that they eclipse most external conflicts. Unlike the United States, which has often intervened globally, China has historically been focused on its own internal affairs. However, many people fail to fully grasp the complexities of China's history and its present-day motivations, leading to misinterpretations of its global ambitions.
And you're an interesting case study because you are an American, obviously. You've done a lot of incredible manufacture here in the United States, but you also work with China.
I've spent a lot of time in China and met with the leadership many times.
Maybe a good question to ask is, what are some things about China that people don't understand, positive, just in the culture? What's some interesting things that you've learned about the Chinese?
Does this historical precedent suggest that China's ambitions are limited, or does modern geopolitics challenge this assumption?
Well, the sheer number of really smart, hardworking people in China is incredible. There are really, if you say like how many smart, hardworking people are there in China, there's far more of them there than there are here, I think, in my opinion. And they've got a lot of energy. So, I mean, the architecture in China that's in recent years is far more impressive than the US. I mean, the train stations, the buildings, the high-speed rail, everything, it's really far more impressive than what we have in the US. I mean, I recommend somebody just go to Shanghai and Beijing, look at the buildings, and go to, take the train from Beijing to Xi'an, where you have the terracotta warriors. China's got an incredible history, very long history. And, I think arguably in terms of the use of language from a written standpoint, sort of one of the oldest, perhaps the oldest written language. And in China, people did write things down. So now China historically has always been, with rare exception, been internally focused. They've not been acquisitive. They've fought each other. There have been many, many civil wars. In the Three Kingdoms War, I believe they lost about 70% of their population. So they've had brutal internal wars, like civil wars that make the U.S. Civil War look small by comparison. I think it's important to appreciate that China is not monolithic. We sort of think of like China as a sort of one entity of one mind, and this is definitely not the case. From what I've seen, and I think most people who understand China would agree, that people in China think about China 10 times more than they think about anything outside of China. So it's like 90% of their consideration is internal. The good news, the history of China suggests that China is not acquisitive, meaning they're not going to go out and invade a whole bunch of countries. Now, they do feel very strongly, so that's good. I mean, because a lot of very powerful countries have been acquisitive. The U.S. is also one of the rare cases that has not been acquisitive. Like after World War II, the U.S. could have basically taken over the world and any country. Like we got nukes, nobody else got nukes. We don't even have to lose soldiers. Which country do you want? And the United States could have taken over everything. At will, and it didn't. And the United States actually helped rebuild countries. So it helped rebuild Europe, helped rebuild Japan. This is very unusual behavior, almost unprecedented.
In the aftermath of World War II, the United States emerged as the world's preeminent superpower. With its nuclear arsenal and an untouched homeland, the US had the opportunity to dominate the globe. Instead, it chose a path of reconstruction and diplomacy, rebuilding Europe and Japan, revitalizing economies, and creating a global order aimed at stability rather than conquest. The financial and human costs of this strategy were immense. The US committed over $13 billion to the Marshall Plan, which helped rebuild Western Europe and prevent the spread of communism. Additionally, the US spent substantial resources on its military presence abroad. In the immediate post-war years, about 500,000 troops were stationed in Japan, while up to 300,000 soldiers were deployed in Germany during the Cold War. These efforts were supplemented by military engagements like the Korean War, where 1.7 million US troops fought, and the Vietnam War, where 500,000 troops were sent at its peak. By the 1950s, military spending surged to keep pace with global challenges, with the US spending $50 billion annually on defense by the 1960s, about $400 billion today. Despite this significant investment in military might, the US chose to foster peace through diplomacy, foreign aid, and strategic alliances. The formation of NATO in 1949 and the establishment of international institutions such as the United Nations and the World Bank reflected a commitment to a global order based on cooperation rather than conquest.
You know, the US did conspicuous acts of kindness, like the Berlin airlift, you know. And I think, you know, it's always like, well, America's done bad things. Well, of course, America's done bad things, but one needs to look at the whole track record. You know, one sort of test would be, how do you treat your prisoners of war?
Mm-hmm.
Or let's say, you know, no offense to the Russians, but let's say you're in Germany, it's 1945. You got the Russian army coming on one side, and you got the French, British, and American armies coming on the other side. Who would you like to surrender to? Like, no country is like morally perfect, but I recommend being a POW with the Americans. That would be my choice very strongly. And in fact, Wernher von Braun took, you know, a smart guy, was like, we've got to be captured by the Americans.
Yep.
And in fact, the SS was under orders to execute von Braun and all of the German rocket engineers. And they narrowly escaped their SS. They said they were going out for a walk in the woods. They left in the middle of winter with no coats. And they ran and with no food, no coats, no water. And just ran like hell and ran west. And by sheer luck, I think his brother found like a bicycle or something, and then just cycled west as fast as he could and found a U.S. patrol. Anyway, so I think America has been, while far from perfect, generally a benevolent force, and we should always be self-critical and we try to be better. But anyone with half a brain knows that. So I think there are, in this way, China and the United States are similar. Neither country has been acquisitive in a significant way. So that's like a shared principle, I guess.
If war between the US and China were to break out, where would it begin? For China, Taiwan is not merely a neighboring island. It is, in their eyes, an inseparable part of their nation. The US Pacific Fleet has long prevented reunification by force, but as China's military strength grows, the balance of power is shifting. China has been unequivocal. Taiwan will be incorporated, peacefully or otherwise. Will the world witness another Munich Agreement, appeasement leading to greater conflict? Or is Taiwan truly the red line that cannot be crossed without global consequences?
Now China does feel very strongly about Taiwan. Been very clear about that for a long time. You know, from their standpoint, it would be like one of the states is you know, not there like Hawaii or something like that, but more significant than Hawaii. You know, and Hawaii is pretty significant for us. So they view it as really that there's a fundamental part of China, the island of Formosa, now Taiwan, that is not part of China but should be, and the only reason that it hasn't been is because of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
And as their economic power grows and as their military power grows, the thing that they're clearly saying is their interest will, clearly be materialized.
Yes. China has been very clear that they will incorporate Taiwan peacefully or militarily, but that they will incorporate it from their standpoint is 100% likely.
Something you said about conspicuous acts of kindness. As a geopolitical policy, it almost seems naive, but I'd venture to say that this is probably the path forward, how you avoid most wars. Just as you say it, it sounds naive, but it's kind of brilliant. If you believe in the goodness of underlying most of human nature, it just seems like conspicuous acts of kindness can reverberate through the populace of the countries involved.
After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles punished Germany harshly, planting the seeds of resentment that led to World War II. After World War II, however, the US took a different approach, helping to rebuild its former enemies. This act of generosity prevented another global conflict and ensured lasting alliances. Could such a strategy be applied to China today? Is it possible that conspicuous acts of kindness, rather than threats and posturing, could diffuse tensions and avoid the cycle of reciprocal violence?
Yeah, well,
and de-escalate.
Absolutely. So, after World War I, they made a big mistake. They basically tried to lump all the blame on Germany, and saddle Germany with impossible reparations. And really there was quite a bit of blame to go around for World War I, but they tried to put it all on Germany, and that laid the seeds for World War II. So it's a lot of people, well, not just Hitler, a lot of people felt wronged, and they wanted vengeance, and they got it.
People don't forget.
Yeah, they're not going to forget it. They will want vengeance.
The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, is often regarded as one of the most controversial peace settlements in history due to its harsh provisions imposed on Germany after World War I. Among the most outrageous terms were territorial losses, the war guilt clause, and the crippling reparations. First, Germany was forced to surrender significant territories, including the Saar Basin, which was rich in coal, and its overseas colonies. These losses weakened Germany, both economically and strategically, leaving it humiliated and vulnerable. The infamous war guilt clause placed full blame for the war on Germany, not only vilifying the nation, but also providing the justification for the staggering reparations that followed. The reparations, set at 132 billion gold marks, were economically devastating. This immense financial burden led to hyperinflation and social unrest, further destabilizing the country. These provisions were seen as excessively punitive and contributed to the resentment that fueled the rise of extremism in Germany, ultimately leading to World War II. The Treaty of Versailles, in its harshness, failed to bring lasting peace, and instead sowed the seeds for future conflict.
So after World War II, they're like, well, the Treaty of Versailles was a huge mistake in World War I. And so this time, instead of crushing the losers, we're actually going to help them with the Marshall Plan, and we're going to help rebuild Germany. We're going to help rebuild Austria and the other, Italy and whatnot. So and that was the right move.
It does feel like there's a profound truth to conspicuous acts of kindness being an antidote to this.
Something must stop the cycle of reciprocal violence. Something must stop it, or it will, it'll never stop. Just eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, limb for a limb, life for a life, forever and ever.
The question remains, are the United States and China doomed to repeat history, or can they forge a different path? Can two superpowers, with distinct cultures and conflicting interests, find a way to coexist? Or are we simply watching history unfold, unable to stop what has already been written? The choice is ours. But is anyone truly listening?